Rafael Moura pushed open the glass door of Bistro Madeira and Sal at 3:30 on a common Thursday afternoon, and no one looked up. His navy blue suit had a perfect crease, but the fabric was old, the kind you wash carefully because there isn't money to replace it, even when there is. His shoes, worn at the soles, made a discreet sound against the varnished wooden floor. To everyone there, he appeared exactly as Claudio Martins expected, just another black man trying to enter where he didn't belong. Rafael chose one in the corner, near the window overlooking Avenida Brigadeiro Luis Antonio. He sat down slowly, like someone who knows they will be watched, and waited. What no one there could know, not the impeccably white-shirted waiters, nor the customers chewing their wild mushroom risottos, nor Claudio Martins, who was adjusting his tie knot behind the counter, was that the man sitting at that discreet table owned all of it. The chairs, the dishes, the salaries that reached accounts at the end of each month. Rafael wasn't there to eat. He was there to confirm a suspicion that had been gnawing at him for weeks, the anonymous tip that had reached his desk, handwritten, with a trembling hand. Mr. Moura, there are things happening at Madeira and Sal that you need to see with your own eyes. He continued to wipe a glass that was already clean. Rafael waited. He raised his hand again. Another waiter, an older man, black like him, met Rafael's gaze for half a second, and then turned his face away, too quickly. There was something in that gesture. It wasn't disinterest. It was fear. Effusive recommendations for the house wine. Rafael observed every detail, the way the waiter leaned his body slightly, deferentially, the way he filled the water glass to the brim with care, small courtesies that added up to a welcoming ritual. "Excuse me, I'd like to place an order. This is a high-end establishment." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "We don't serve—" "You here." The sensation of being measured and discarded, of being seen but not truly perceived. Or perhaps it was simply the pain of confirming that despite all he had built, to men like Claudio, he was still just another one. Each step felt heavier. Behind him, he heard Claudio's muffled laugh. He heard his voice, low, but not low enough. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. His eyes burned, but not from tears. It was rage. It was sadness. It was something larger he couldn't name. Because Rafael had learned, over 52 years of life, that men like him didn't have the luxury of losing their temper. Donna Lourdes, his mother, washed clothes in the early hours for families from the South Zone. She would arrive home at 6 in the morning, her body exhausted and her hands wrinkled from so much soap. Rafael waited, awake. He helped hang the sheets on the makeshift clothesline in the 3-square-meter yard. Donna Lourdes would smile, always smile, even when there was no reason. But Rafael, even as a child, felt something was wrong. It wasn't fair that his mother broke her body so he could learn to read. Sebastian was a quiet man, not for lack of thoughts, but because he had learned that his words carried no weight. At the condominium, he was the doorman, never Sebastian, never Mr. Moura, just the doorman, or you there, or hey. They needed to replace a light bulb that had burned out in the entrance hall. Rafael held the ladder while Sebastian climbed. That's when a resident passed by. A blonde woman with large sunglasses, an expensive bag on her shoulder. She stopped. She looked at Sebastian and said, with that voice of someone who expects no argument, "Last night I almost tripped here." Rafael looked at his father. He saw something on his face he would never forget. Shame. Not for having done something wrong, but for existing in the wrong way. That night, Rafael made a silent promise. He didn't yet know how he would fulfill it, but he knew he would. He would never, ever, bow his head to anyone. Afterward, he went straight to night school. He slept 5 hours a night when he slept. His body ached. His hands became calloused from washing so many pots and pans. But he never missed a day. Rafael observed everything. How the owner calculated costs, how he negotiated with suppliers, how he treated customers, not with subservience, but with genuine respect. He woke up at 5 in the morning to prepare everything. He stayed there until midnight, 7 days a week. Not just for the food, but for the way he treated each customer, with attention, with care, with dignity. Sebastião died when Raphael was 28. A sudden heart attack. He collapsed at work in the middle of his shift. Raphael received the news by phone. He rushed to the hospital, but by the time he arrived, it was too late. His father's body was covered with a white sheet. Raphael pulled back the sheet. He looked at Sebastião's face, still in his navy blue uniform, his ID badge still pinned to his chest. Raphael stood motionless in front of the coffin, feeling that pain that no amount of crying could release. His father had dedicated his entire life to serving people who didn't even remember his name. And now, in his final hour, he was there, almost alone, to be respected, so that when he died, people would know who he was. But the price was high. She simply said, with that sadness that hurts more than anger. He didn't know how to respond, because deep down, she was right. But they didn't understand. They couldn't understand. And that Thursday afternoon, leaving the Madeira and Sal bistro, Raphael realized something devastating. He had everything, and it still wasn't enough. He parked the car at the entrance to the community and continued on foot. He knew the way by heart. 52 years don't erase the memory of your first steps. He thought of Donna Lourdes. He thought of Sebastião. He thought of how many promises he had made within those walls, how many he had kept, and how many, in the end, truly mattered. They said they couldn't stand the work environment anymore. Marcelo, cancel all my meetings for the next 3 days. I need to resolve this personally. Both arrived separately, like regular customers. Raphael entered last, again in his old suit, worn shoes. He sat at another table. He waited. And yet, when the waiter passed him 3 times without attending to him, when Claudio approached with that disdainful smile, when the phrase, "I think you'd better find somewhere else," rang out again, the pain was no less. It was like repeatedly tearing a bandage off an open wound. Each time, it hurt just as much. "I am asking to be served," he said in a firm voice. "It's my right. This is not the place for you." Bruno, seated 3 tables away, discreetly recorded everything on his phone. Carla, by the window, jotted down every word in a small notebook. Clear audio, sharp image. When she opened the door and saw Raphael, her eyes widened. She recognized him immediately. After all, Raphael visited all the restaurants periodically, but always in a new suit, always accompanied by managers, always announced. Never like this. Alone, humble, vulnerable. Family photos on the walls. The smell of fresh coffee. Teresa offered him a chair. Raphael sat down. "I can't stand being treated like I'm less anymore." Raphael felt anger rise in his throat like bile. It was that silent weeping of someone who had cried alone so many times it had become routine. And in that moment, he understood something fundamental. Revealing he was the owner would be easy. Punishing Claudio would be simple. But that wouldn't change the system. It wouldn't change the structure that allowed men like Claudio to exist in the first place. "And this will end. And yesterday, Claudio kicked me out of my own restaurant because he thought I didn't belong there. Do I just fire him, or do I do something bigger?" But the question that tormented him remained. How to do this without becoming as cruel as those who had hurt him? There were managers in other restaurants in the chain with similar practices. Subtle discrimination, institutional racism disguised as professional standards. And all of this was documented. Spreadsheets, emails, reports. A system carefully constructed to keep people like him, like Teresa, like Donna Lourdes' children, in the place society had decided they should occupy. Competent people who had helped build the empire, but also people who, Raphael now saw, had never needed to think about these things. Because for them, the system worked. "Raphael, this can't be true. I want to fire Claudio Martins. I want to audit all our HR processes. I want explicit anti-discrimination policies. I want mandatory training. I want salary transparency. And I want," he turned to face the board, "this to be public. I want everyone to know what happened and how we are going to fix it." Then Jorge, the legal director, spoke. "I was born in Paraisópolis. My mother washed clothes in the dead of night. My father died without anyone remembering his name. I built all of this." He pointed to the window, to the invisible empire stretching across the city. Because I swore it would be different, that it would be fair. And now you want me to be complicit in this? Either we do what's right, Raphael said, or I sell this company tomorrow and start from scratch, alone, decide. Thinking of all the times he had been judged by his color, not his character, and thinking too of the consequences of what he was about to do. Raphael, you always made everything about yourself, your pains, your struggles, your conquests. And now, when you've been hurt, you want to turn this into a crusade. But have you thought about the people who will be affected? About the employees who might lose their jobs if the company suffers? About your children, who will have to deal with the exposure? Julia, I was thrown out of my own restaurant. I was treated like trash. And when I investigated, I discovered that this happens every day to dozens of people. Do you want me to ignore that? And if it was about both, did that make the cause less valid? He wanted the contradiction to be clear. Even with all his success, he still wasn't enough. Or worse, I saw it, but I didn't want to accept that it could happen to me too. I thought my success protected me. I discovered it doesn't protect. And today, I take responsibility. Claudio Martins has been fired. But he's not the villain of this story. The villain is a system that allows men like him to act without consequences. And I, as a leader, failed to prevent this. Was he doing this for the right reasons? Others attacking, yelling that he was destroying jobs, that it was all virtue signaling, that it was just whining. The country was divided. And Raphael, at the center, felt the weight of having opened a wound he might not know how to close. Offers to buy the company from investors who wanted to clean up its image. And amidst it all, a message from Pedro, his son. It was Marcelo, and his voice was filled with panic. Raphael watched Claudio Martins' interview on a computer screen in the empty company office at 2 a.m. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't do anything but hit play and watch, repeatedly, the meticulous destruction of his credibility. He sat in a leather armchair, facing a presenter who nodded in solidarity with every word. And now I'm being painted as a racist because I didn't recognize my own boss. This is a campaign to destroy me because Mr. Mora can't stand being treated like a regular customer. Easier to swallow. What about the evidence, the documents, the testimonies? I only wanted the truth. Raphael stood there, alone in the dark office, feeling for the first time in decades something he thought he had left behind. Powerlessness. He had money. He had power. He had proof. But none of it mattered if people chose not to believe. My name is Teresa Almeida, she began, her voice firm despite the tremor. I've worked with food for 23 years, and I want to talk about Claudio Martins. She showed work schedules where black employees always got the worst shifts. She showed everything. The video went viral. In 6 hours, it had 1 million views. In 12 hours, 3 million. And then, something extraordinary happened. Other employees started speaking out. Not just from Raphael's chain, from restaurants across the country. People who had kept their pain, their testimonies, their evidence, waiting for the right moment. And that moment was now. A hashtag was born. Utambem fui expulso. In 48 hours, 50,000 people shared stories. Black people expelled from stores, from restaurants, from condominiums. Well-dressed people, rich people. People who thought money would protect them, but discovered it didn't. And for the first time, he understood something fundamental. It wasn't about personal revenge. It never was. It was about creating space for thousands of silenced voices to finally scream. The same presenter who had defended him before now pressed him with sharp questions. That it was. He covered his face with his hands. My God, what have I done? A system that Raphael, even as a victim, had helped perpetuate by not questioning, by not looking, by not wanting to see. He lost his job. He lost his reputation. His wife filed for divorce. His children stopped speaking to him. And Raphael, seeing that, felt no satisfaction. He only felt sadness. Because in the end, no one had won. Only different people had lost in different ways. Hiring and promotion targets for minorities. Complete salary transparency. Mandatory unconscious bias training. Anonymous reporting channels. Investors who understood that sustainability included social justice. The new manager was a black woman named Andrea, who had worked at the company for 10 years and had been constantly overlooked for promotions. She had transformed the restaurant. The team was diverse, the atmosphere welcoming, and Raphael, for the first time, sat there and was just another customer, not out of disregard, but out of equality. She had been promoted to executive chef at another restaurant in the chain. She sat down at Raphael's table without ceremony. And you had the courage to start, not an email, a physical, handwritten letter with a trembling hand. The sender was Claudio Martins. On the things I said, the things I did, and I realized something terrible. I was not an exception. I was the rule. And as long as I was not punished, others like me continued. You punished me, and it was painful, destructive, but necessary. And I am trying to be different. Not for public redemption, not to get my life back, but because I no longer want to be that man. He just needed to write. Perhaps in the end, this is all that remains, to acknowledge the wrong we have done and try, even if never enough, to be less bad. Insufficient, but real. I discovered I can own everything yet be treated as nothing. But I also discovered my pain isn't just mine. When I speak, thousands of voiceless people speak through me. And that is bigger than any restaurant, bigger than any fortune. And when he stood up, he felt lighter. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because he had learned to carry it differently. When he pushed open the glass door, Andrea, the manager, looked at him and smiled. A young black waiter approached. He smiled genuinely. When the juice arrived, Raphael raised his glass. A silent toast, not to victory, not to revenge, but to the possibility that perhaps one day, no one would have to prove they deserved to be where they were. That skin color would become as irrelevant as it should always have been. That dignity would not be a conquest, but a birthright. São Paulo pulsed outside. Millions of lives, millions of struggles. Raphael knew his story was just one among many, but also that individual stories, when summed, became movement. And movement, eventually, became change. And sometimes, he thought, watching the restaurant full of people of all colors sharing the same space, sometimes an open door is the beginning of everything. It was about creating spaces where everyone could belong. But like a man who had learned that some victories are measured not by what one gains, but by what one transforms.